Let's talk about some of the differences between human language and animal communication. A useful way to start this discussion is to talk about the design features in animal communication. In 1960, Charles Hockett published a paper in which he described 13 different design features in communication, and he compared which ones are involved in human language and which ones are involved in communication systems in other species. We'll talk about 4 of these design features. The 4 features that we'll talk about are the principle of displacement, the principle of arbitrariness, the principle of productivity, and the principle of discreteness. And we'll see that human language heavily relies on these 4 principles, while few of the animal communication systems in other species involve these principles. The principle of displacement refers to the fact that linguistic messages may refer to things that are distant in time, space, and possibly both. So when your dog is barking now, he's not likely communicating about something that happened yesterday. But when humans communicate, we can refer to events from the past or talk about things that might happen in the future. It's quite likely that bees actually do meet this criteria of principle of displacement. When they do their waggle dance, they've returned from the food source and they're back at the hive, and they're doing their dance to communicate about where the food source is, how good it is, and so forth. So humans are not the only species to use the principle of displacement in communication. Just recently, new research with orangutans suggests that they actually might be able to communicate about past events. There's a link on Canvas about this new study. The principle of arbitrariness refers to the fact that there's no logical connection between the form of a word, how it sounds or how it's spelled, and its meaning. The one exception in human language is automatopoeia. Words like drip and buzz and zip, they sound kind of like what they mean. But in human languages, there are thousands and thousands of words in Spanish, and they're different than the words for those same objects in English. So most of our words in human language, they have really no inherent meaning with what the individual word means. And if we wanted to, we could just decide as a culture to stop using the words we use today and adopt new ones. So we are just associating specific sounds to the meaning arbitrarily. In non-human primates, you see a small vocabulary of distinct calls, and these are typically alarm calls or social chatters, and the sound that is made has some relationship to what the meaning of that vocalization is. So if it's an alarm call, it's going to sound urgent and have some fear or danger in the sound that it's being made. It's quite likely that bees actually do meet this criteria of principle of displacement. When they do their waggle dance, they've returned from the food source and they're back at the hive, and they're doing their dance to communicate about where the food source is, how good it is, and so forth. So humans are not the only species to use the principle of displacement in communication. Let's consider again the bee's waggle dance. Here you see the movement of the bees is not arbitrary. It is a direct relationship to what is being conveyed in the meaning. So the direction of the food source and something about the quality of the food source. Human language has the principle of productivity. With a small set of rules, we can produce new messages that people have not heard before, but they have no trouble comprehending them because they're using the rules of the language that they learned in childhood to decipher what's being said. So we can make up new sequences right on the spot, and people around us understand those with no problem. Animal languages do not have this flexibility to create new messages from a small set of rules. In those studies in which non-human primates have been taught human-like languages, researchers have looked for examples where the animals have used new messages, where they've demonstrated the principle of productivity, how they produce sequences that they'd never heard before. And the fact is, Coco has produced one or two of these, and Washoe produced one or two of these, and Kansi produced one of these. But by far, the numbers are not very high. These animals do it very rarely, while humans are doing it a lot of the time. The principle of discreteness refers to the fact that human language can be described as composed of smaller parts: words, morphemes, syllables, and phonemes. Animal forms of communication tend not to involve these smaller parts. Recent research with prairie dogs suggests that maybe animal communication systems can involve this principle of discreteness. There's a link on Canvas about this particular study. See what you think. The fact is, we know very little about how animals communicate. In fact, we have so much research yet to do. Frans de Waal is a researcher at Emory University who says we might be in anthropodenial. He says to endow animals with human emotions has long been taboo, but if we do not, we risk missing something fundamental about both animals and us. So I hope in the future we'll find more people studying how animals communicate in the wild, and maybe it'll provide us insight into our own cognition. That's all for now.